Book 1, Chapter 6. I have thought about Chapter 6 more than all the other chapters combined. It feels like the novel is really getting deep here, and this particular discussion of Chapter 6 might go on longer than the others, but I just see no way around that. Maybe put on some headphones and do some dishes or go for a walk if you're interested. I'm not sure how long this will be, but it feels like the novel is really getting dense. The first few chapters we were introduced to numerous characters who are more complex than maybe our first judgments would give. You know, we were seeing Prince Vasily as this calculating, older gentleman of influence, and yet he has this heart to grant Boris, or at least on behalf of his mother, to get on board with getting Boris in the Guards. And so you see this heartfelt sort of sense within Prince Vasily kind of going against himself. You see this in Anna, who for the whole time is very suspect and critical and argumentative against Pierre, and just in every manner is just like worried that Pierre is going to ruin the party and the vibe. And then at the end, she's saying goodbye to Pierre, and she's like, Pierre, I don't like your ideas, but I like you, and I hope to see you again. Doesn't matter, of course. And so you can kind of see this funny nuance of things. You can see Pierre being very argumentative and naive, and just, it's all about ideas, and then meekly he's sort of embarrassed by himself, and he just really doesn't want to have anyone think poorly of him, or have a sort of a negative, be one to kind of stir things up negatively, in as much as it's upsetting anyone. And so you keep seeing all these sort of multi-dimensions of people, even this far in. Like Prince Andrei, this very cool, existential, jaded person who's very intelligent. He kind of sees the threads beneath, like, a piece of fabric that's very patterned on top, but underneath you see all these loose ends that really aren't supporting anything. And his intellect is such that he occupies this space, and he's really bored with these sort of parties and discussions, political discussions that to him seem so one-dimensional, and yet he engages in the conversation, and of all the people he gives the most balanced view. Yes, Pierre, you're right, but you're wrong. Yes, Anna, you're right, but you're wrong. We can certainly give Napoleon credit for this and that and the other thing, but on the other hand, boy, how can you defend what he did here? And so it's funny how he sort of occupies both spaces at the same time. And so we get the sense of how these characters, we have to be slow to reserve our judgment based on our first impressions, because these characters are much more complex and authentic to everyday life and people, to myself and people I meet. And I think this is an illustration of good writing and why I like this story. We're continually surprised. In Chapter 6, we have Prince Andrei and Pierre going back to their place, and they're in conversation. I'd like to just say it provides good context. I was at a coffee shop this morning, and behind me were 3 or 4 young men. I would guess age 18 to 20 or something like this. And they were maybe stereotypical or prototypical young men. They were just talking brashly, confidently, vulgarly. You know how young men can be. Strong with opinion, strong with ideas, completely confident within themselves, speaking loudly, outwardly sort of like no shame and unafraid. Inwardly, you know that deeply unconsciously there's fear there, and they're just at the beginning of sort of this being free as young adults, so to speak. But you know they're still just sorting things out. But this would be something that even they themselves are unaware of. You know, they're the smartest people in the room, but you know, they aren't really. And they're really sort of very fearful inside. And so, well, at the same time, you can just kind of be disgusted by them or in conflict with them or whatever. You also, in some ways, empathize with where they're at, even in ways that they are unaware of. This is how young men can be. You know, they're willing to grab onto idea and, you know, fight you about it, even to harm, even to death. You know, this is who goes to war. It's young men. Just, they would be willing to shoot and kill another person over some idea. And this is interesting about young men. They are kind of psychologically untethered and yet tend to extremes. Eventually what happens to these young men, they grow older and they calm down their opinions, they grow quieter. And you might say they change and learn and grow, and this might be true to some measure, but it also seems that they kind of, in an unconscious way, just sort of realize, you know, it's not in my best interest to be this kind of wild, untethered person anymore. Life is going to be a lot easier if I just start adopting some of the cultural norms around me, whatever they may be. And so it might be that older men, they're not all that smarter, but they've just kind of learned to adapt to the environment. And I bring this up as this chapter 6 is about Pierre, Prince Andrei, and Lisa interacting together. And Pierre and Prince Andrei are young men. And we've certainly seen this in Pierre, just enthusiastically full of ideas and willing to be extremely naive. Pierre, Prince Andrei, not unlike Pierre, has kind of thought this through for a year or two as well, and has kind of settled into kind of a more desperate existential crisis of his own. And so I find this interesting in my own modern everydayness, meeting and interacting with these young men. And you see some of these elements playing out here. And I want to just say something about Lisa. And I might just have to read a bunch of the text, as this chapter is just so dense to me. You know, in Lisa, we see I see similar to Pierre. You know how Pierre was kind of a person, like everyone was sort of drawn to him or intrigued by him, even though maybe he had naive ideas and so on. He was a person, you know, how Anna was like, she was in complete conflict with him, yet in the end it's kind of like, Pierre, I like you. You know, there was an authenticness to him that was raw and unfiltered, but it was in such a way, it wasn't this brash kind of way that other young men can be that are just like totally offensive. You know, there's this element in him that's still just very appealing, and people still like to be around him. And you see this sort of in Lisa too, how she was presented as this young woman, contrasting with Ellen. Ellen was this beautiful young woman, but at least as it's presented so far, sort of one-dimensional. But with Lisa, she was this woman that people were drawn to, attracted to, but it wasn't her beauty so much, it was just herself. And she was like a bright light, and people wanted to be around her. And so in this way, we can sort of see Prince Pierre and Lisa, at least in my mind, sort of similarly. And I just really have to give credit to Lisa, how she's navigating her life as this young woman in this male-dominated world very graciously. And I think I just might have to read bits as I go. Lisa comes into the room. They're at Prince Andrei's house, and Lisa comes into the room, and Prince Andrei stood up and politely placed a chair for her. This isn't insignificant. It's just another short sentence, but gives us an insight into the conflict going through Prince Andrei's mind. And I might be at times making comments jumping ahead, but you know, it illustrates these sort of contradictory and conflicting things in Prince Andrei's mind at the same time. He has a decorum and a respect, and even I would say this love for Lisa, to treat her in a certain way and take care of her, while at the same time being quite cool and cold and even harsh towards her. But here she comes into the room, and he politely gets a chair for her. And Lisa in the room, just similar to when she was at Anna's. So Pierre's there, and she says to Pierre, "What an argumentative fellow you are, Monsieur Pierre." And so, you know, this seems very playful, you know, it's kind of being carried over from the party about how Pierre was kind of just saying the opposite of kind of the common Russian sort of patriotic message. And Pierre says, "I'm still arguing with your husband. I can't understand why he wants to go to war," said Pierre. And this is really the spark of the whole chapter. Pierre brings this topic up with Lisa, just very innocently. You know, I'm still in argument, and it's really an argument that only Pierre is having. Prince Andrei is just shrugging off all these things that Pierre is saying, kind of, you know, Pierre is the one person that Prince Andrei seems to have an unlimited graciousness towards. Other people may say things Pierre says, and he would just be sort of disgusted and just like, these stupid people. But with Pierre, there's something about friendship that sort of melts criticism away. So Pierre, "I'm still arguing with your husband. Why does he want to go to war?" With none of this, he says this, with none of the restraint common to young men in the presence of young women. So you know, Pierre is comfortable in this home, and he just keeps on speaking his mind. And here you have these two very likable characters in interaction with each other. These words, however, kind of spark something in the princess. And here we get to see another dimension of Lisa, and how, in fact, their marriage, Prince Andrei and Lisa, is not going well. And she's pregnant. She's living in Moscow. Her friends are there, but she has this. She's deeply worried and she's deeply distressed. Their marriage is strained, and it almost completely is centered around Prince Andrei. How Prince Andrei has changed, and she's very worried. And she expresses this. Why is he going to war and leaving me? And Pierre is starting to get uncomfortable with this conversation. And Lisa is growing more and more animated in the presence of Pierre with Andrei there. And she turned to her husband with a significant look. I'm afraid, she whispered, and a shudder ran down her spine. Prince Andrei, what are you afraid of, Lisa? I don't understand. And I see these words from Prince Andrei as having two dimensions. On the one hand, he does understand, I think. He knows their marriage isn't going so well. He knows that it's his own doing and his own internal struggles. He knows she is a woman who's trying to sort this out. So when he says, I don't understand, I think he's really, this is just, he knows what, he doesn't know how to engage with her. He has no means. What he doesn't know is how to engage with her and communicate with her, what's on his mind. And he also doesn't know the answers to his mental struggles. He doesn't know what he should do next. He doesn't know how to get out of the momentum of his life and where it's leading. He doesn't know the answer to these questions of futility and contradiction in life that he's dealing with. He doesn't know how to positively engage in life and society given these thoughts percolating through his mind. So, and this in turn makes it very difficult for him to be gracious with her and heartfelt with her, even though there is that deep within him, I believe. I don't understand, he says. And Lisa, this conversation becomes even more and more personal. She speaks of, you're going to send me out to the country, and you're going to leave me out to the country where Prince Andrei's father and sister live. So for Prince Andrei's mind, he's going to war, and just the only thing he can do to dutifully take care of his pregnant young wife is to send her to the country where she will be cared for, and she doesn't want to go there. She wants to stay in Moscow with her friends, and it's kind of like this would be even worse in Prince Andrei's mind to leave her there, even if with this, in his mind it would be an abandonment of her to leave her in Moscow, even though that's what she wants. And you see, this just illustrates how people can just be in conflict, and you want something good for someone, but this itself isn't enough to resolve what is the kind and loving thing to do. Good intentions, confused, strained good intentions, you'll just keep hurting the people you love. Anyway, this conversation between them just becomes more and more personal. And the prince repeats, I still don't know what you're afraid of. He repeated in an even tone. And he's really at a loss, I think, which illustrates where he is internally. He's at a loss to know for himself what the purpose of his life is. And the princess blushed and threw up her hands in despair. "Oh, Andrei, you have changed. How you have changed." And Pierre peered through his spectacles with naive surprise, looking at the prince, then at his wife, and he stirred uneasily. "I have wanted to ask you for a long time, Andrei, why have you changed towards me? What have I done? You are going to war and you feel no pity for me. Why?" And you just feel for Lisa. She's doesn't have the mind of Prince Andrei. You know, if someone's depressed, you can't just tell them be happy. It doesn't work. If someone's angry and you say, you know, your anger is just hurting yourself, it just doesn't work. You know, there's a calculation that has to happen. And there can be self-awareness for that depressed or angry person, or that person going through a struggle. They can be self-aware that they're hurting the people around them. But still the answer eludes them. You know, I think of many metaphors, and they're not perfect. So don't think of, I think of this child-parent metaphor, and don't think of Lisa as the child. That's not what I mean. But you have a child who's playing, who's happy, comes in for dinner, and they don't have awareness of what struggles the parent's going through, paying the bills, working hard. There's just no relating on that way. Again, this is not that type of relationship. I'm trying to just describe a metaphor. It could be between two friends, or just think of two worlds. Think of two older friends, of which their lives don't overlap. You know, maybe think of this metaphor. You have a friend, this is sort of an abstraction, who believes the world is flat, and they're happy. And they can't understand the suffering and strain their friend is going through. Why don't you just believe the world is flat like I do? And, you know, it just doesn't work this way. Now, again, these metaphors I'm describing, they totally break down. I believe Lisa to be a strong, smart person navigating life pretty skillfully, but I'm just trying to underline how the thoughts in a person's mind and their perspectives and their environment, just this whole mental, you know, it's not just the world, but it's the world that you see that really plays the largest role. And in this case, we have just this very sad situation between Lisa and Andrei. And I think Andrei is very self-aware that he is the one contributing to this, but at the same time he can't just abandon what he knows and his intuitions. And so also we get this sense that previously, 6 months ago, the marriage was much better, but you get this sense that there's this momentum to Prince Andrei's life. Maybe he got married. It wasn't really a choice of his, but there's just this momentum of this is what you do, and here's a lovely lady. And he's coming to realize, man, this was a mistake. This is not. And it has nothing to do with Lisa. It's all to do with him sorting these things out as a young man. And it just grows and grows in intensity. And finally, Prince Andrei says, "Lisa, I beg you to desist." And Pierre, who had been growing more and more agitated during this conversation, stood up and went to the princess. He seemed unable to bear the sight of tears and was ready to cry himself. And your heart's just pouring out to the situation of here's a group of people sort of wishing the best from each other, and yet as humans with our minds, it's kind of a sad, tearful thing, but this seems kind of authentic to me, how people are. Even given people with just nothing but good intentions for each other, or wishing the good. And Pierre tries to console the princess, and he really doesn't know what to say. And it sort of breaks down. And the three of them together just like finally quit speaking. The friends did not speak. Neither of them, I think they're talking about Andrei and Pierre, neither of them felt like breaking the silence. From time to time, Pierre glanced at Prince Andrei, and Prince Andrei kept rubbing his forehead with his hand. Mentally, it's quite often there's no solutions to be had. You know what you know, and there just is no sunlight shining on that situation. And you really feel heartfelt for all I do, for everyone involved here. Finally, Andrei said, "Let's go have supper." He's speaking to Pierre. And they leave together. And so halfway through supper, like a man who has long borne something in his heart and suddenly decides to speak out, Prince Andrei leaned on his elbows on the table, and with an expression of nervous irritation that Pierre had never seen on his friend's face before, began to talk. And so here for the first time, you get this, a little bit of an articulation deep into Prince Andrei's soul and what's going on here. And Pierre's, for Pierre, Prince Andrei is his hero. And here he's hearing Prince Andrei talk in this extremely deep and vulnerable and emotional way.